Welcome, everybody. I'm John Hinderaker, president of Center of the American Experiment, and I'm here with Dave Zimmer, policy fellow at American Experiment. The big news story, obviously, is the attempted assassination of presidential candidate and former president Donald Trump, and that's what we're here to talk about today, Dave. And you've got a lot of expertise in this specific topic of protecting presidents and other high-value people, and I want to get your informed ideas and opinions and observations about this assassination attempt. And let's start with your experience.
Well, as a captain with the sheriff's office and served there for over 33 years, we helped the Secret Service with a number of presidential visits over the years, and we also attended the inauguration ceremonies in D.C. for 5 or 6 inaugurations in a row. So I brought a group of 40 deputies out to Washington, D.C.
So you were in charge of the group?
Right. Brought those deputies out to be part of a larger law enforcement presence, about 4,500 law enforcement officers from around the country. Went out to D.C. every 4 years and helped the Secret Service secure the parade route for the inauguration.
So you've actually worked security for how many presidential inaugurations?
3.
3 presidential inaugurations in Washington, and doing that in collaboration with the Secret Service.
Right.
So you actually have experience working with the Secret Service on presidential protection.
Yes.
And then when presidents would come to the Twin Cities, here again, you would be involved in security?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
At least a dozen times.
Okay, and again, collaborating with the Secret Service.
Right.
All right. So we're going to talk about this assassination attempt, and let's maybe set the stage by talking generally about the security environment and security process when you've got an event where a president or presidential candidate is appearing.
It usually starts with an advanced visit from the Secret Service team that will be protecting the presidential candidate or the president. So they'll come into town a week or a week and a half before and scout out the site where the event's going to take place, and also call a meeting of all of the local law enforcement partners that will help them secure the event. And at that time, assignments are made and a plan starts to take hold as to who's going to be responsible for what. Ultimately, the Secret Service is responsible for the security, but they rely heavily on the local law enforcement presence.
And is there actually a written plan then that comes out of that meeting?
Yes, a number of plans. The Secret Service will have the overall plan, and then each individual agency would have their own internal plan as to what their personnel were up to.
So at some point here, again, coming back to this incident in Pennsylvania, presumably it's going to get made public. The Secret Service had a written security plan for the event. Each agency had a written plan. It'll be really interesting to see those plans.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll ever be made public. I think they're protected for obvious reasons, so that people can't read them and see, oh, this is how they protect a
I see
person.
a hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So in an event like this, as I understand what you're saying, Dave, a large majority of the law enforcement personnel present are not going to be Secret Service. They're going to be different branches of local agencies.
I'd be amazed if the majority of officers in this incident weren't local officers.
So there's a smaller contingent of Secret Service people supported by a larger group from local agencies. Right. And I've seen a statement made by somebody from the Secret Service that in this particular instance, the Secret Service had responsibility for security within the perimeter, whatever that means or that's defined, and outside the perimeter, like these buildings we're going to be talking about here in just a couple of minutes, that was in the hands of local law enforcement. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's a pretty typical situation. And there's always a Secret Service officer assigned to be the liaison with those other areas. But as far as boots on the ground, manpower, I'm sure it was local law enforcement.
But again, operating under the direction of the Secret Service and pursuant to a Secret Service plan.
Right.
And when Trump got shot, and we've seen this, thankfully not very many times, but we have seen it before. When the shooting started, we see the Secret Service agents come running out, put their bodies in front of the protectee, as you call him.
Right.
And that's really their focus, right? I mean, they really are specifically focused on the person they're protecting.
Yes, that their focus is really 100% on the protectee, and to whisk that person away if there is any sort of threat that develops.
So one of the obvious questions that comes up when you've got a bunch of people involved, representing different agencies, and so forth, is communications. And talk a little bit about that. How is a communications network typically set up in this kind of environment where you're protecting a presidential nominee?
Well, from my experience, there would be a number of different, we call them talk groups or channels being used. And the Secret Service would have their own internal talk group dealing with the detail specifically assigned to the protectee. And then the other outside agencies would be operating on one or two other channels.
All different, or would they be together?
No, they'd be oftentimes different, because you would have maybe a SWAT channel and a regular perimeter channel, and then maybe a first responder channel or second responder channel. So
there's probably 3, 4, 5 different channels on
Right.
which people are talking.
Right.
So how does that get coordinated?
What's supposed to happen is there would be a command post set up where representatives, heads of each of the agencies or groups that are providing the protection, would be centrally located or located together. And they'd all be talking with their personnel on their channels, but then be able to coordinate if there was an incident going on, like in this case, an incident outside the perimeter. The supervisor in charge of those people would be talking to those officers and getting that information and then sharing it with the other group.
So that group, however large it is, it wouldn't be very big, right? We're talking
No,
about just a few.
A handful of people.
They are physically together.
That's the way it should happen. Yes.
Right. They're
Yeah.
supposed to be. And is there any uniformity in terms of where they are? Could they be anywhere, or is there a?
Yeah, they really could be anywhere because they're talking on the radio, but they're usually pretty close. In a building, it could be in a command post vehicle or something like that.
So if there's something that is a concern, like a guy on a roof, for example, that comes to the attention of one of the local agencies, that gets reported to their commander, their incident commander, right?
Right.
And he should be sitting there next to or standing there next to the head Secret Service guy on site,
Right.
right? And I assume that there is one Secret Service person who's in charge of this whole thing, right?
Yes,
And so there should be instant communication, more or less.
there should be, yes.
And then when the Secret Service guy gets the word, hey, my people are reporting there's a sniper on a roof, or whatever it might be, a handgun
Right.
in the crowd, or whatever it is, he then should immediately be able to relay that information as appropriate to his Secret Service personnel.
Right, right.
So let's talk a little bit. I mentioned the building, and of course everybody now knows what happened here, at least in rough outline. There was this group of buildings located a little distance away from the perimeter, from the area that was actually the scene of the event, and ways away from the stage. And as I understand it, there were multiple buildings kind of together. Is that right?
Yeah, the map I have seen, it's one business that has a number of, looks like metal pole barns that are all connected in some way, with a parking lot outside of them. And it was, I would call it within the outer perimeter of the event itself. It was about 130 to 150 yards from the stage.
Where the assassin was.
Right.
And then it would go back farther than that, I think, because he was in the closest building, or on
That's
top of
right.
the closest building.
Yep.
Right? Now, this is not unusual, is it? I mean, doesn't it happen all the time that there's buildings 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards, and when they do this initial review, isn't that one of the obvious things that they look at?
Without a doubt. I'll use the inauguration, for example. We're set up on Pennsylvania Avenue, and there are buildings on both sides of Pennsylvania all the way to the Capitol. And virtually on every rooftop or every building, there's an outdoor patio or something. So along that entire route, there are dozens of people out on rooftops, and it's just another thing that you have to keep your eyes on while you're out there.
And I've heard the phrase line of sight in connection with this assassination attempt, and I guess the meaning of that is obvious, that what you're concerned about is buildings in the area where if a person was on that building, or maybe at a window in that building, might
Right.
be, he's got a clear view and therefore a clear shot
Right.
of the stage or the event.
Right. Line of sight would be very important in a security event like this, because that's what you want to prevent, is somebody getting to a location where they have direct line of sight with the protectee and could take a rifle shot.
So to get into the event itself, and I've actually experienced this, you may have too, but to get into the event itself as an attendee of the event, you got to go through a metal detector, right? So they have that kind of basic security. And so if someone's going to get up close, you could take a shot with a handgun, but the idea is you can't get the handgun in because everybody's going through a metal detector, right? And then there's other protections too. But what we're talking about here is somebody who's not inside the perimeter, not going through a metal detector, not going through any kind of security where somebody has eyes on him, is a longer distance away. So now you're going to be talking about a rifle, not a handgun.
Right.
So just to kind of sum up, these buildings, in your view, when the people had their meeting a week or ahead of time or whatever, and they're making the plan now for security, securing those buildings or the area around those buildings would have been an obvious priority.
Yes. The rooftops of those.
The
sure.
rooftops,
Yep.
yeah. And I don't think they had windows, right? It's not like an
Didn't
office
look
building
like
or
it.
something.
It's more of a manufacturing steel building.
Yeah, right. And so what would you expect the security plan for those outbuildings to be like? I mean, would you expect that there would be a police officer on the roof of each of those buildings, or how would they normally do that?
I wouldn't. Given those buildings, they were, again, prefab metal buildings. I wouldn't say that local law enforcement would position themselves up on top, but what I would expect is the plan to be very robust in terms of the number of officers and the police presence at the base of those buildings, so that it would deter anyone from getting the idea that I'm going to climb up on that roof and take a shot.
And again, you can't take an accurate shot. I think that about 150 yards is the distance this assassin was at, but you can't take an accurate pistol shot at 150 yards.
No.
So, we're talking about a guy who apparently was able to access these buildings, maybe starting at the one farthest away. We're not sure exactly what route he took, but he was apparently able to access these buildings while carrying a rifle.
That's what we're hearing. Well, obviously he did. But we don't know if he had it secreted in something or in a jacket or something.
Hard to hide a rifle, isn't
right.
it? I mean,
well, a little bit. Yeah, well, those are questions we just don't have the answers to yet. But you would hope that law enforcement had a presence at the base of those buildings to prevent somebody from getting on top with a rifle, and obviously they didn't.
Well, number one, nobody should get on top of the building, period.
Right.
And number two, anybody that looks like you might be carrying a rifle, obviously shouldn't be happening.
Right.
Okay. And the distance, say it's 150 yards, that is not a particularly long distance for a rifle.
It is and it isn't. You can take a very accurate shot with a rifle, and you should be able to get a very close group at 150 yards with a rifle. And yet it's not, you can't just point and shoot. You have to aim and breathe slow and pull the trigger slow and steady.
This is a key point, and we're going to come back to this, or maybe we just talk about it now.
Okay.
You mentioned this morning, and you're not one to boast, David, but you are a good shot with both a rifle and a handgun, right?
I am.
And so if you have time to set up your shot, secure your rifle, like in sandbags or something, right, ideally, but whatever. So it's a firm positioning, time to sight, get a clear shot. 150 yards is not a
not
long
difficult.
distance, not for a rifle.
Right.
If you don't have time, if you're hurried, well, that's a totally different matter.
Right. Right.
Okay, so that's the guy on the roof. And is it fair to say that the fact that a guy got up there with a rifle is just a really fundamental failure of security?
Yes, we don't know what happened exactly, but that should have never been allowed to happen. That was not part of the plan.
And one of the things about this incident that strikes people as being so kind of crazy is there's civilians on the ground who see this guy, and there are videos where, and we don't know the exact timing, but there's videos where you can hear him yelling, "There's a guy on the roof, he's got a gun." And they're trying, and one guy was interviewed, you and I have both seen the video, I think it's about 4 minutes long, BBC.
Yes.
Interviewed him, red-haired guy,
Yep.
seemed very credible to me, right after the event. And so we have this vision of civilians on the ground trying to tell law enforcement people there's a guy on the roof.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Well, so I'm really going to be interested to read the after action report when it finally comes out, and there's a really well-established timeline. What we're relying on right now is Twitter and a few news accounts and some speculation.
But we're also seeing videos, to be fair.
We are, but we don't know exactly the timing of everything yet,
Right,
I don't think.
right.
But once they put that all together, what I have seen are videos where there are citizens clearly seeing somebody on the roof yelling, "Hey, there's somebody on the roof here." But we don't know exactly when law enforcement was hearing that and actually responding or getting on the air and calling out that threat. And my hope is that once that chatter started happening on the police radios, my hope is that would have been a pretty short amount of time, and they were trying to confirm whether that person on the roof was a friendly, maybe a law enforcement officer or whatnot. What's important here, one thing we haven't talked about, is the shooter was on the back side of a peaked roof. It wasn't a real, prominent peak, but it was a peak. And none of us have seen the view that the snipers had, but my guess is they saw a head poked up over the peak looking, and that he probably didn't have his rifle out the whole time. I would assume if the Secret Service sniper saw a man with a rifle pointed towards the protectee, they would have shot him fairly quickly.
So let's just walk through the process a little bit. So we know that there's people on the ground who are yelling, "Guy on the roof, he's got a gun."
Yep.
And whether it's immediately or after a few seconds, but that comes to the attention of some of these local law enforcement people stationed around these buildings, presumably.
Right.
So what's the process?
Well, I'll just say what I would do if I was an officer. If somebody told me that on one of these details, I'd get on the air right away while I was making my way, so I could see what they're telling me. I'd get on the air and say, "I'm being told that there's a man on this steel building to the west," or whatever direction it is.
Now, you're talking about the channel you're on,
Yep.
which goes to the guy in command.
To my boss.
To your boss, who's at the command post right next to a Secret Service guy, presumably,
Right.
who's in charge for them.
Right.
So you're talking about you get on the phone to that guy and tell him, "This is what I'm hearing. I'm trying to get a view myself."
Right. But you want to alert the command post right away that somebody is saying there's a man on the roof, so that they can also. I'm assuming there were some remote cameras, possibly a drone, who knows? But there should have been other mechanisms for the command post to see the
Something
area.
better than just a guy on the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I would make my way there and try to visually confirm what the citizen was telling me, and then relay that information up. Now, I know that during these incidents, there are always reports of something suspicious going on. And if the Secret Service was running up and pulling the protectee down during a speech at every one of these incidents, it would be chaos. So it doesn't happen very often.
Well, let's elaborate on that a little bit, Dave, before we move on, because the last time somebody took a pot shot at a president or a presidential candidate with a rifle from a distance, I think was Kennedy, wasn't it? I mean,
we were talking about this before, and I believe with a rifle from distance, yes, it would have been the Kennedy assassination. There's been Reagan and a number of others up close with a handgun. But that's not the situation we're talking about here.
And so at some point, if there's a threat perceived, what the Secret Service should do, is come running out there and protect the protectee, in this case, Trump.
Yes.
Get him off the stage until they figure out what's going on.
Right.
But you don't see that happen very often. In fact, I can't think offhand. Maybe I've seen it happen, but
yeah, I think that's going to be a last ditch thing to do, and so they want to confirm that it's an actual threat.
And so the idea that somebody on one of these channels, the chatter that's going on the radio, that there's a report of a possible threat is not that rare.
No, it's not that rare. Maybe not.
Guy on the roof with a rifle is rare.
That's rare, and that would make ears perk up, and would make some action.
Yeah, you'd certainly hope so. Well, one thing that we think we know occurred, because it's been reported, but again, fog of war, right? Initial reports on these incidents, you can assume, are going to not be entirely correct.
Absolutely. We know the basics of what happened, but inevitably, as the investigation proceeds, we will learn things that got reported on day one that weren't exactly accurate.
Or may have been totally wrong sometimes.
Right.
So, but one of the things that's been reported, apparently based on statements made by other law enforcement people who I think were unhappy about it, that's my interpretation, is that one of the local law enforcement guys who was stationed in this area of these buildings that we've been talking about, 150 yards, whatever, from the stage, did, in fact, climb up. The civilians are yelling, "There's a guy on the roof," and whether he'd verified that, seeing himself, I don't know. But the report is that a police officer did, in fact, climb the ladder up to the roof.
I've read that account. I think it was an AP report that I read, and the sheriff was commenting that a local law enforcement officer did get up to the roof, saw it was a man with a gun, and wasn't able to shoot him at that point. And what we don't know is, what did he do in response? I'm assuming he got on the air right away and confirmed, I have a man on the roof with a rifle, and that he didn't scurry down the ladder and run away.
Let me question that a little bit,
All right.
David, because the report that I've seen is that the police officer gets to the roof, and I'm not sure if there's a parapet or whatever, but he gets there, so he can see, sure enough, guy with rifle. At that point, Thomas Crooks, the gunman, turns his rifle and points it at the police officer.
Right.
And as I understand it, the police officer sure didn't shoot at him. We know that.
Right.
And as I understand the report, the police officer did kind of, vamoose down the ladder. Now, you tell me. That doesn't.
Well, I would be shocked if he scurried all the way down the ladder and left the area. My guess is he took cover, which would be appropriate with a man with a rifle.
But given the reports that these civilians were yelling, "Man on the roof, got her gun," shouldn't he have climbed the ladder with his firearm out of his holster in his hand? And when he gets to the roof and he sees, sure enough, guy with a gun, and in fact, he's starting to point it at me.
Right.
I would think that his job at that point is to try to take out the assassin.
I would agree. For some reason he didn't. We don't know what that reason is. If maybe he didn't have his gun out. I would hope he did as he got to the top, but those are just things we don't know.
So this is an example of something we don't know yet that we should keep our eyes open for. What is the story with this guy who apparently climbed up the ladder but didn't take any effective action? Why not? What happened? Okay. So let's shift focus a little bit now. That's what's going on top of this pole barn or whatever this building is. Meanwhile, over in the vicinity of the stage, and I'm not sure exactly where these Secret Service snipers are, but I from the videos, it looks to me like they're in the vicinity of the stage. Is that right?
It looks to me that like they're behind the stage, not as far away as the building that the suspect was on, and that looks to me like it was to the right of the stage, or from President Trump's view to his right. 150 yards away, and then the buildings that the two sniper teams were on were directly behind the stage, maybe 50 yards.
Okay. And I think there were two snipers. Is that right? Did you figure that out?
There were two sniper teams of two, so it looks
okay.
like four snipers. One, I believe, was looking at the crowd. The other was probably, because they were positioned that way, looking at that group of buildings where the suspect eventually fired from.
And of course, by the time we were looking at the videos, we're starting to get into this incident, but it looks to me like those snipers were pre-positioned so that they're facing those buildings because that was an obvious potential threat zone.
That's my guess, yes.
Okay. And so when we see these videos, it looks to me like these snipers, and when you say four people, it's two snipers and two spotters. Is that how it works?
From the pictures, it looked like they were both armed, so they were both snipers. It looks like they both had sniper rifles.
Okay, so it's two people, not four people.
Two teams of two, so a total of four. There was a team on one building focused on the crowd, and a team on another building focused on the buildings that the suspect was on.
So four snipers altogether.
Four
I got
altogether.
it. Okay, four snipers. Two of whom appear to be just focused right on, from the first time you see them in the videos.
Right.
They appear to be focused right on the building where the assassin actually was.
Right. Oftentimes what those teams do is one's a cover officer, so the sniper that can focus on threats, and the other officer is focused on keeping that sniper safe. But they both look like they had long-range sniper rifles.
So, as we've all seen on the videos, the snipers are there. They've got two rifles pointed at that building where we now know the assassin was. Trump is speaking down below, and all of a sudden there's three shots. And let me give you my speculation, David. You tell me if you think it makes sense. I speculate that what happened is that Thomas Crooks is on the roof, and he hears a noise. He looks over, and sure enough, a police officer has climbed up to the roof. Crooks sees him, and he swings his rifle around, and the police officer apparently disappears without firing a shot. But Crooks knows now he's got to act fast. He doesn't have any time to spare. He's been discovered. He's been seen. And so my interpretation is he now hurries his shots. Does that make sense to you?
It does. That's the most plausible explanation of what took place. Again, we don't have the timeline of everything, but that fits with what probably took place.
And the fact that he took three shots, and the best he could do was to graze President Trump's ear. And obviously, it's easy to say it's an easy shot when you're at range or something. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not easy in real life when you're shooting at a person.
Right.
But certainly the fact that he hit some people in the crowd, but not Trump, except for the one that grazed his ear, that would be consistent with getting hurried shots off, not really set up and clearly focused.
It would.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was a full crowd behind and to the side of the president, and unfortunately one person was killed and two injured. So.
You're going to hit somebody.
Right. That would make sense that 3 rounds were fired.
Yep. And the videos, as soon as those rounds are fired, it's bam, 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 bam. The snipers open fire.
Right.
And they immediately kill this guy. I mean, if you're a sniper with the kind of rifle they use and scope that they've got, the distance this is, that's not a hard shot.
Right. One thing we don't know, and I'm being a little bit protective of that officer on the ladder, there's quite a possibility he shot at the guy as well at that point. We don't know if he actually left the ladder and ran away.
Okay.
So,
all right,
yeah.
Fair enough. So when you look at the video, and again, this is interpolation. We're all speculating a little bit. The difference is you actually know what you're talking about, and so it's informed speculation. But the way it looks to me on the video, these snipers are aimed and ready to fire. When they don't reposition their rifles, they don't do anything. When Thomas Crooks fires, it's bam, bam, bam. They fire back.
Yep.
And so does that suggest that they had him in their sights? They had visual contact with him, and they were waiting for clearance to open fire. And once he started shooting, well, now the rules of engagement are such, that you can take him out. What do you think about that?
That makes sense. What I'm guessing is, like I said, the suspect was on the backside of a peaked roof. My guess is he was just peeking up over that roof and not exposing a rifle, certainly for any length of time. If you notice some of the video, it shows the sniper with the tripod sniper rifle. For just a split second, he pulls his head up to look with his naked eyes, and 100 yards, 150 yards isn't far, but he just pulled up as the shots were being fired. And you almost wonder if he was instinctively going, is that a rifle? Like maybe the suspect just produced the rifle a second before he started shooting.
So are there standard rules of engagement here or not? I mean, is it the kind of a thing where the snipers have to wait for their commander to give them a green light to fire, or do they have discretion there?
Well, they would have discretion. I would have to believe in a detail like this, if they saw a rifle being pointed at the protectee, they would fire. They wouldn't have to wait for authorization there. What they would want to do, though, and I'm sure they were trying to confirm this, is make double sure that this was a bad guy and not a sheriff's,
not one of us.
Not a sheriff's deputy that took a position up on that roof, and that they weren't aware of, because it's the last thing they'd want to do is, kill a friendly. And
super interesting. So that kind of walks us through the event. Obviously, the aftermath is important. Trump goes down. The Secret Service is all over him. He gets up. There's this wonderful moment where he's got the fist, and the blood coming down his face, and those pictures are never going to be forgotten. The flag in the background. And eventually they get him off the stage. But it was interesting to me, this instinct of the Secret Service is to hustle the protectee off. He's just sort of like a bag of, whatever. They're just trying to get him off the stage.
Right.
And that's kind of ignominious if you're the protectee. You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't have any control. You don't have any power. You're just being hustled off like a commodity. Trump didn't want that. Trump wanted to show that he was okay, number one, and he's in charge, number two.
Yeah.
So he resisted being just hustled off the stage. He paused to communicate with his crowd, and you can hear the roar when they see him.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure the Secret Service officers were conflicted there. I'm sure they were tugging, but they also have to a certain extent, they have a duty to work with the protectee too, but their mission takes precedence at that point when
Right.
shots have been fired.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's sum up here, David. This is such an interesting incident, and I think you shed a lot of light on it. Let's talk about takeaways. First of all, what a lot of facts are not yet in, but some facts are in. What can we say with some confidence about this event?
Well, there was a lapse in that outer perimeter area, a lapse of security. There's just no excuse for somebody with a rifle to be able to get on a roof with a line of sight to a presidential candidate. So that, whether or not maybe we've all become, when I say we, the law enforcement, we've all become victim of a little bit of success. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened, knock on wood, for decades. And maybe, not maybe, that will now be firmed up again. I'm sure post-Kennedy, all kinds of changes were made, and now post-Trump, all kinds of changes will be made to, maybe we won't see outside venues for the remainder of the campaign. Who knows?
Trump would hate that.
He would hate that, but...
Well, one thing we can say, as I understand what you're saying, though, Dave, one thing we can say is there was a very serious lapse in security on any scenario.
Yep.
Last year, this year, next year, a guy ought not be able to access these buildings with a rifle.
Right. The other thing is that it'll be interesting to see that timeline when we see the radio timeline. when did the Secret Service know that there was a threat on the roof, a man with a rifle? And if it was just 5 seconds before the shots rang out, it's probably too quick to have whisked him off the stage. But if we're talking a minute or so where they knew somebody with a rifle was on that roof, then you would have expected the detail to go up and pull the candidate off the stage.
So I think you mentioned earlier that one thing we don't know yet, really I think the key thing we don't know yet is what's in the radio logs.
Yeah. Right.
Would you expect the radio logs to be made public? There'll be an investigation.
I doubt it. I doubt the recordings will actually be made public, but probably that timeline that, well, I'm sure
transcripts.
The timeline will be, and maybe the transcripts will be very detailed in the after action report.
Because that's going to tell us who knew what when.
Right.
And if there was a delay, there have been reports of civilians on the ground for a minute, 2 minutes. I've seen 4 minutes. That seems like a long time.
Right.
But there have been different reports of civilians on the ground for some period of time, trying to draw attention to this guy on the roof. And it's those radio logs that'll tell us what was going on within the law enforcement group.
Right.
And if there was a delay that shouldn't have happened, or if there was confusion or failure to communicate, the logs ought to reflect that, I think.
Yep. I often describe it as some paralysis, I guess, where information's being transferred from one group to another, and then, are you kidding? Let me confirm that, please. And it goes back and forth, and there's a little bit of paralysis instead of prompt action.
It's been a long time. In fact, it's never happened that a Secret Service, and by the way, the snipers are Secret Service, right? They're not local.
That's what's been reported. I do see that, the just kind of the generic police
right. I saw
on
that
their
too, yeah.
on their vests, but that's pretty standard that the Secret Service would just wear a police vest.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I wondered about that too. But I don't think it's ever happened that a Secret Service sniper has had to take out a would-be assassin, has it?
I'm not aware of that happening either. No.
So you go year after year, decade after decade, preparing for the unthinkable, and then all of a sudden it happens.
Right. I'm sure for those snipers, and they train all the time, but there's a bit of, is this really happening going on? And, I'm not saying they delayed. Again, I have to believe that rifle was concealed until one of the very last moments before he started shooting.
And then, of course, once he shot, immediately they returned fire.
Right.
Well, it's super interesting, Dave. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this. Obviously, there's information yet to come out, and
right.
No doubt some of the information that we've been reading about will turn out not to be correct. On the other hand, we've seen videos and so on, and I think the basic outlines of what happened are pretty well known, and I think it's something that people are going to be talking about in the law enforcement community for a long time.
No, I have to agree. Thanks, John.
Well, thank you all for joining us.